At Independent Variable, one of our favorite topics as we aim to train practitioners on how to use data to drive innovation is the concept of social innovation, using general innovation practices to drive impacts in the social or public sector. Now, one way we often like to start our trainings is by asking a room full of people a basic question, right? What if success truly mattered? If you were going to actually lose your job, if your next client who received your services or went through your program did not succeed, and you were given the exact same amount of money and resources to serve that client as you receive now, would you design your services in the same way? And oftentimes, whether it's a room full of probation officers or youth advocates or people providing services to folks most at risk for gun violence, like a common reaction is almost laughter. People are like, no, of course I wouldn't do things the same way if I was going to lose my job if someone didn't succeed, which begs the question, why do we feel like we have to do things that way now, right? And oftentimes people feel powerless, it seems, to think that they could redesign their services to be more effective for the people who are receiving them. It's not anybody's fault. It's just sometimes in some of these big systems, we feel like we might be a cog in the wheel or we can't actually design something any different. So a good thing is we always tell people, hey, like these are just policies. We can redesign things in a different way to make them more effective. But to do so, we need to understand some basic principles about social innovation, right? And one framework that we like to talk about is the lean impact framework, which talks about social innovation as kind of the nexus of three things. Are our services or programs delivering value for the people who receive them? If people receive these services and go through them, are they having the desired impact, right? Are we having a positive effect on people? And can we deliver these things at scale? We don't have infinite money to pay for everything. So is your service being delivered in a way that is like cheap and efficient or more cheap or more efficient or more effective than another service that could be provided with the same amount of money? But today we're going to talk about this concept of value, right? And why it's so important and oftentimes under considered in these kind of public social sector systems. So to think about this, let's talk about, not a criminal justice or juvenile justice system, but a general free market system. In this case, let's actually look at like a farmer's market, a real market. And in this farmer's market, there's going to be a good. Today, let's just take a look at these green beans. We're going to be healthy today. So you have a good and you're a provider and you're selling this good, right? Maybe these are peas or green beans, whatever you want to call them. And so my livelihood is dependent upon people coming and buying this good. So someone's going to come to my stall, they're going to pay me money, and this person is going to pay for the good, they're going to take it home and they're going to use the good, or maybe they'll use it in a restaurant. Right? So if this good stinks, right? If the peas are bad or they're too expensive, this person's just going to go to the next stall down the road. So I have a couple options, right? Either I improve my good, I offer a different price point, but if I don't do that, this person really has like direct purchasing power over me, right? If they go somewhere else, I'm going to lose my job or lose my proverbial house. Now let's think about how this value proposition works in the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system. And we're going to note here it's like very, very different. So the person who's paying for most of our services in the criminal or juvenile justice system is not the person who's receiving the service. In fact, it's our old friend Joe Taxpayer, right? It's a general taxpayer is giving money to the government, and the government's going to have a contracting agency, right? This agency is responsible for putting together contracts that people bid on and provide public services. So let's say, for example, we're in a city and a lot of kids start stealing cars. We're not really sure why car thefts have gone up, but there's a spike in auto thefts. So this contracting agency might put together a proposal committee that says, you know what we need? We need a program that's going to help serve kids who are stealing cars, right? To make sure that people stop stealing cars, that folks who stole cars don't steal cars again. And these folks are going to maybe sit in a room and say, what do people need who steal cars? And someone might say, I think they need jobs. And someone else might say, actually, I think they need a social program. And someone else might say, hey, basketball is cool. I think they need a basketball program. So let's put together a program where someone gets a job. And if they get a job, they get to play basketball. And if they get to play basketball, maybe we're going to give an incentive. But keep in mind, right, oftentimes we haven't actually talked to anyone or any kid about if any of these assumptions are true, right? Do they want to play basketball? What kind of jobs would they want? Do they want jobs, right? This is a lot of assumptions baked in behind the room. So then this committee is going to issue what's called a request for proposals or an RFP. They're going to say, we want a program that provides jobs and social services and, athletic programming to kids who are accused of stealing cars. That's going to go out through some sort of contracting portal. and providers are going to, write their contract, write their grants, they're going to submit them, right? And then this provider, let's call them provider A, gets awarded the contract. Their bid was considered the best. Now, how does a kid get put into this program? Very different in the criminal justice system. They're not strolling the aisles of the farmer's market and saying, like, hey, the green beans or the peas over here look great. They're often referred or direct court ordered into this program, right? They don't have a ton of choice oftentimes. And then they are forced to go to this provider. So keep in mind, this is a very different relationship. If you are court ordered into a program and that program isn't good and you stop showing up, the provider oftentimes is not going to be the one who gets in trouble. The kid or the client is going to be the one who gets in trouble in this situation, right? They don't have that same purchasing power. If they walk, the provider doesn't necessarily go out of business. The kid often gets in trouble. So just noting in this diagram, there's no direct relationship between the person who is receiving the services, the provider who's providing the services, and the person who's paying for the services, right? So if we're not very careful, right, there can be a flaming gulf of communication between all of these parties, right? So everyone's incentives aren't as clearly aligned as they were in our first diagram. So we're going to somehow find a way, or need to find a way, to oversee this contract to make sure, right, that it is delivering value, the provider is doing what they said they're going to do, and that this client is actually receiving a benefit from these services. So how do we oversee this contract? Right, we're going to need probably some form of data or some form of oversight. And oftentimes, this is what we do at Independent Variable, or why we do what we do. People sometimes think data is this like very nerdy thing, but we actually really need it in order to make sure that there's some sort of positive incentive to make sure that we're delivering value in these services, right? Because there's no direct relationship between payer and user, client and payer, provider and payer. Sometimes we're all in paper files. Even if we try to reach out to somebody who's receiving a service, sometimes we don't have good phone numbers. Sometimes people's phones are out of service. So this is a pretty tricky problem, but inherently it's something that we like to point out in these trainings, that there's a very different incentive structure in the criminal or juvenile justice system, or any social system really, where the payer is not the user, where there's not a direct incentive or a direct accountability structure between the person who's providing the service and the person who's receiving the service, which makes the curation and maintenance of good data and good oversight hugely important to make sure that people are getting the value out of the services they're receiving, right? That these services are scalable and efficient, and that everybody from the taxpayer to the user of a service to the provider of a service, that all these incentives are aligned and we're delivering, innovative and impactful social and public services.